It's good to speak on the Trans-Tasman Proceedings Bill, third reading, and I spoke yesterday really about the broader Australian relationship that this bill is a marker of and a facilitator of, if you like, in that it enables us to keep pace with the ever closening of relationships and business deals and so on between us and Australia. It's a very worthy bill and a marker of the ever closer relations and mutual success we have with our Trans-Tasman partner, Australia. This will be just as important, probably more so, in very complex, large business transactions where we as a country and Australia as a country have every interest in keeping the relationships going and deepening those business relationships so that both sides of the Tasman can become more prosperous.
From CANZUK International, I'm Matt Lavault, and this is the CANZUK Podcast. In this series, we will explore the potential union between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. How can this alliance increase freedom of movement, free trade, and foreign policy cooperation between these four countries? To discover what the CANZUK Alliance means, I welcome the Honourable Simon Bridges, who is a Member of Parliament in the New Zealand Parliament representing the city of Tauranga. Mr. Bridges served as leader of the National Party and leader of the opposition between 2018 and 2020. Thank you for accepting the interview.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Matt. It's wonderful to talk to you.
It's crazy how there's 17 hours of difference between Montreal and, I'm guessing, Wellington, correct?
Actually, right now, I'm in my constituency of Tauranga.
Okay.
And that's about an hour's flight from Wellington. I've been in Wellington all week, but today I'm back home where I live with my family and had a full day of various constituency duties. So it's I'm talking to you from the city that I love most in the world.
Well, that's great to hear. So can you tell the guests of this show what CANZUK means to you and how did you first hear about it?
You know, this is a good question. I'm not exactly sure when I first heard of it, but it's been a while now. You know, it's probably been a good 2-3 years or something. I got more seriously interested in it in the last year or so. And I've seen the things that politicians who I like and admire around the world, the leader of the Conservatives in Canada and others, one of the people I know well, Matt, James Skinner. I've seen some of the things he's been doing. I've been following things on social media. And so my interest grew from that. And I think in the end, for us in New Zealand, certainly for me at least, if I speak for myself and my views, I look at New Zealand. We're a very small country. We're probably the furthest away in the world developed country you could get. You couldn't get more remote. And so we can't do things by ourselves. We need to be very outward focused in terms of trade. We won't get rich selling to ourselves. There's not enough of us. But also in terms of our values and our wider sense of connection. And if you think about CANZUK, to me, it's as we say here, and probably you do in Canada, Matt, it's a no-brainer. We have a shared history and set of values as common to us as countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom, as any in the world. So this hookup, if you want to put it colloquially, just makes great sense. It's as I say, a no-brainer.
And do you think the distance, in terms of physical distance between New Zealand, Canada, and the United Kingdom, could be a barrier, or do you think in this hyper globalized world it really doesn't matter anymore?
I don't think it matters. I think what would matter would be if as countries we were no longer similar. And of course, we've got cultural differences, but similar in terms of that sense of our history, where we've come from, our values and our interests. But it seems to me they're very similar. We are all relatively prosperous countries. We're all outward looking. We all believe in the rule of law and democracy and all these things. But more than that, whether it's on the sports field or in arts, there's just so much there that ties us together. Quite literally, our families tie us together. For myself, my wife is British. She's from the United Kingdom. And so, she thinks of the United Kingdom as home. For other people, look, they'll have those close ties between, say, Canada and Australia. So all of those things mean what ties us together is much more important and unifying than that geographic distance, which, as you say today, COVID-19 accepted and maybe is the exception to this. It's but a plane trip. It's but a phone call. It's but one Zoom, a press of a button, and we're all together.
And do you think that is interesting, you yourself as, mixed Maori and English ancestry, that in many of these countries, the CANZUK countries, we find a great depth of multiculturalism going on. Do you think that's something that's very intriguing about creating this alliance, is that multiculturalism?
I think that's right. And I think I can, best speak from a New Zealand perspective. We perceive ourselves as one of the most multicultural countries in the world. But look, of course, I know that is also true and a great feature of Canada. For example, for us, we have in Auckland, our biggest city, really the capital of the Pacific in terms of the Polynesian people, Micronesians, and the like. And that makes Auckland and New Zealand very, very exciting. Ethnically. I think more broadly, if you think about all of the countries in the CANZUK project, we are countries that are part of the Commonwealth and that historic sense of that. And Britain, through the Commonwealth, has always been outward looking. Now, there may be some negative aspects of it, but of course, there's a lot of positive ones. And it means, for example, other former Commonwealth countries like India, like Pakistan, and so on, have looked to, in the first place, Britain, but also share a lot with, say, New Zealand. I was in India a couple of years ago, and whether it's cricket, whether it's our English language, whether it's our university systems, there's a lot that we share, and that means that Indian New Zealanders, feel right at home in our country, as I know Canadian Indians do where you are in Canada.
Right. And I think that's very interesting because I'm a student at McGill, and I found that, for the students that I've seen on exchange, a lot of them were Brits, Australians, one from New Zealand. So it seems that there is that common understanding or common culture, I guess, in a sense, not necessarily similar, but similar in thinking, which is very intriguing, as you said.
We sound a bit different, Matt, but
Of course,
I think,
yeah.
in truth, I know. I went to a university in the United Kingdom. So I met my wife, Natalie. There's the blood ties, if I can put it that way. 3 of my 4 grandparents' ancestry is from the United Kingdom. But more than that, culturally, if I'm with a Canadian, if I'm with an Aussie, if I'm with someone from the United Kingdom, we have an understanding. We share a way of thinking.
Right.
That isn't necessarily always there with other countries. There's so much sort of historically, culturally in common that we can laugh at the same jokes. We can have a sense of the same values very naturally, I think. I mean, look, moving along in a sense, Matt, what I would also say, though, is aside from that, if that was all there was, it wouldn't necessarily CANZUK work. But I think there's also a sense of interest. We are countries that could quite quickly do more trade together. We could quite quickly share people flows, work visa arrangements and the like, in theory, and that would be very good. That would be in our interest. So it's more than just that history and values. It's also a sense of, this could really work for each of our countries.
And going forward, so let's talk about also free movement, because that's also something that's very intriguing about CANZUK. Between Australia and New Zealand, there's the Trans-Tasman Travel Arrangement, which for the listeners allows Australian and Kiwi citizens to move freely between the two countries. Has the TTTA actually helped improve the economies between both countries?
I think it certainly has. You'd always get people who say, "Oh, well, look, Australia's come out of it better," or Aussies say, New Zealanders are getting a better deal out of this than we are. But I think for the most part, look, if you're objective, it's worked very well for both countries. It's made us closer. It's been stronger for our economies. It's been great in terms of people links. And I think what's really important is, if you think about the CANZUK nations, what works is we're all broadly comparable economically. There's not one that is hugely more wealthy than another. There will be slight GDP differences and the like. And this matters because it means, were we to keep integrating, getting closer in terms of our trade, but also those people flows, it's not like someone's going to be swamped in a week. There's not suddenly going to be 1 million Canadians who say, "Oh, look, I've decided I hate Canada and I'm going to move to New Zealand." That's just not going to happen, or vice versa. But over time, it means that as there's a skills shortage in one country, people can move seamlessly there and fill those, and vice versa. And that, I think, together makes us all stronger.
Right. And so do you think that CANZUK is just the extension of this partnership between Australians and Kiwis? Do you think that it'll be eventually, let's add, the Brits, the Canadians?
I think that's the concept largely, right? It's if we think about those 4 countries, Australia and New Zealand would today be the most integrated of those. We have CER, closer economic relations, now for 30, 40 years. And that means there is really a single economic market. I'd be pushed to think of 2 sovereign nations in the world that are more closely connected economically. And so the thought of rolling that out to other countries, is obviously one that's, well, just that, obvious. That's not to limit CANZUK, though. It could be more than that. It could, in other ways, whether I'm merely using these as hypothetical examples. It could be something that has foreign policy potential,
Right.
that has security potential, that has cultural potential in terms of sharing and working together. So economic, people flows are 2 obvious starters. And let's not underestimate how challenging they'll be, because, there will always be interests and issues in each home country that says, no, we're not sure about this. But it could also be more than simply people flows and trade.
No, I agree with that. And so, Mr. Bridges, I know this is a complex issue, but if a CANZUK alliance happens to become reality, how do you make sure that the Maori not feel excluded with such a project, and making sure that all New Zealand society reaps the benefits of an alliance like this?
It's a good question. And, certainly, as you've noted, I'm a Māori New Zealander. My iwi is Ngāti Maniapoto, which comes in the centre of New Zealand. That's my tribe, to put that in common language. I certainly can't speak for all Māori. There'll be a multitude of views. But I think one thing that's worth thinking about, and this is just a very basic, simplified version of New Zealand history, is back in 1840, Maori tribes signed the Treaty of Waitangi. It was named that because it happened in a place called Waitangi in New Zealand, with Queen Victoria, with the Crown in the United Kingdom. And so, not universally, but historically, as a generalization, there has been a regard for the Crown and the Commonwealth. And so, I think as much as anyone, there'll be Maori New Zealanders who say, you know what, potentially this is a really good idea. It's not to, once again, downplay the details and the issues and the interests that will be at play, but I don't think that there's a particular sticking point that comes from Indigenous New Zealanders from Māori, albeit, all segments of society want a sense of what's in it for us. Will we be left behind? How's this going to work in practice? They're things that should CANZUK become more than an idea, an intriguing one, an alluring one, become a reality, we're going to have to work through.
And Mr. Bridges, in terms of just talking about foreign policy, as you said, New Zealand relatively is a small country in the world stage. But do you think that, New Zealand is already part of the Five Eyes alliance between the CANZUK countries plus the United States? Do you think that can help boost New Zealand up in the world stage?
I think it's a very simple proverb, really, isn't it? Many hands make light work. And if we come together, we're more than the sum of our parts. New Zealand, as you rightly say, and as I've said in this interview, is very small. So we have an obvious interest in multilateralism and being part of wider groups to push for the things that are in our values and interests, whether it's rule of law or democracy, or look, a greater free trade and movement peoples, all of these things. So I think we do stand to benefit from it. My, frank view, Matt, is that some of the sticking points in relation to CANZUK won't just be on our side. As we negotiate a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom at the moment, we know that issues such as meat and dairy, things we're strong in, but actually, Britain has an industry with, and Canada does as well, become very real sticking points. And so the issues won't just be on our side. We've got real interest in doing this. And it's about us finding ways where we can, not just think about our own interests, but how we can accommodate the interests of Britain and Canada and Australia, mollify some of the concerns there might be, to make, as I say, this alluring, intriguing concept more than that a reality.
And Mr. Bridges, before we go, do you think that both sides of the political spectrum in New Zealand can get behind this initiative?
I think so. I do think, if we look around the world at the moment, and the CANZUK countries in particular, it does seem that the parties of the centre-right, Conservatives in Britain and Canada, the Liberal Party in Australia, the National Party in New Zealand, are where most of the interest in CANZUK lies. And I suppose that's obvious as conservative parties. There's still a strong pull towards the Commonwealth. And we also tend to be the parties that are more strongly in favour of free trade and openness and looking out. But that said, if we take the traditions of the left in all of these countries, they also today, by and large, and I say by and large, believe in free trade, believe in openness and being outward looking. As the challenges in New Zealand, for example, but I suspect it's true in other countries, to make sure that as we have all-party or cross-party groups for CANZUK, it's not just the right. Actually, there are prominent politicians on the left taking up the baton as well. So it is truly a cross-party, all-party thing, interest, that will be required to ensure this is durable. At the moment, there's centre-right governments in Britain and Australia. That's not the case in Canada and New Zealand. For this to happen, of course, it needs to be able to stand the test of time and be supported by both the left and the right.
Mr. Bridges, it was great having you.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow CANZUK International on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And for more information on CANZUK, look up CANZUKinternational.com for more up-to-date insight on the current events surrounding this project. Until next time.